Continuing our Wisdom of Jesus series this morning, and we're going to be getting into a story Jesus tells that the principle of it is a very simple principle, but yet it's one that it's just so easy to forget in our day-to-day lives, and it's so easy for us to be caught up in all the demands and pressures of life that we can forget a very simple, straightforward principle. So what we're going to be getting into this morning is explaining and embracing what that principle is. So to get there, we first have to be clear about this. There are things in your life that you want. I mean, maybe want is too weak of a word. There are things in your life that you crave more of. And this is not an issue of contentment or discontentment in these particular things that I'm speaking of. That even if you are a very content person, you want more love in your life. You crave more peace in your life. You crave more goodness in your life. And that's a good thing to desire. I mean, if we don't desire goodness in our lives, if we don't desire love and peace, well, what do we desire? Our lives will tend to follow our desires. Well, we want more of the good things in our lives. Good experiences. Good moments. How do we get them? The future for all of our lives is a plus or minus situation. There are things in our lives that we want more of. How do we get into the plus category in those? The things that we want less of in our lives, how do we get them into the minus category? We're going to work through this, and in the story of Jesus that I'm about to share, I've got to set the foundation for it, a little bit of backdrop to it, if you will. The story that I'm about to share with you from Jesus comes when he's talking about judgment. Final judgment. In fact, the story that we're going to be getting into today from Jesus follows another story that he shared about coming judgment. And that story came on the heels of Jesus giving what would be his most, depending on your perspective, frightening message that he ever gave. When he talked about what it would be like in the last days, how people would treat people, how people would treat the followers of Jesus, and the entire apocalyptic scenario he brought into a very brief but very powerful sermon. So what we're about to read is dealing with the issues of judgment. So I need to say this before we get into the story. There are two kinds of judgments that will be faced at the end of times, when God reconciles all things and brings all of his plan to completion. One kind of judgment is an eternal judgment of whether a person goes to heaven or to hell. This is a judgment of, if you do not believe there is a God, if you do not believe you want to follow this God, if you have not submitted to this God, if you've rejected him, then so be it. This is the path you've chose. Judgment comes with that. If you don't want God, you will have an eternity without God. Judgment is what we would call harsh, but it is just. That's why it's judgment. But then there's a second kind of judgment that takes place at the end. This is a judgment of believers. This is not a judgment of whether the person goes to heaven or hell. The moment you and I become a Christian, Christ becomes our Lord, our Savior, our judgment is sealed. It's set for heaven. Where Jesus is where our home is. But the kind of judgment that Christians will face is a judgment of rewards. Some of you maybe are a little bit familiar with the New Testament, and you've seen the idea of a crown of righteousness, a crown of life, or a reward laid up for me. The New Testament doesn't go into great detail of describing various rewards that come in this judgment, but it does make it clear that Christians, we will give an account for how we have lived the life Christ has given us. Again, this is not a judgment of whether we go to heaven or hell. It is a judgment of what have we done with what God has given us. So understand the context of the kinds of judgment that we're talking about when we see Jesus' words here, and he tells us this powerful story. When we read this story, watch for the multiplication factor, the addition and subtraction that takes place in this storyline. Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 14. For it, the kingdom of heaven, the rule and authority of heaven, will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. So spoiler alert, as we're reading the story, I'll go ahead and tell you right at the front that this man going on a journey, this property owner, this landowner, this man who will be referred to later as master, represents God. God is going on a journey, so to speak. There's going to be a time where he doesn't seem to be involved, where he's not seeming to be interested in what's going on here. He's leaving it to his servants. This man going on a journey calls his servants and entrusted to them his property. Property, and we're going to see in this story, represents money. In particular, we're going to, in just a few moments, we're going to read the next sayings of Jesus, and it's going to include a word called talent. Now, when you and I think of talent, we think of, hey, song and dance, or some ability, some skill we have, that it is a physical ability, that's a talent. But in Jesus' day and age, the word talent literally referred to a measurement. It was a weight of gold or of silver. So it was money. It represented finance. So here the landowner is getting ready to go away on a journey, and he's taking what is his property, his wealth, and he's entrusting it to these servants while he goes away. Verse 15, to one servant he gave 5 talents, 5 measures of wealth. To another, 2. To another, 1. To each according to his ability. Then he went away. So notice that the landowner does not distribute his wealth equally to his servants. And I highlighted this phrase, to each according to his ability, because this is an important concept. We like to desire and we like to think that all of humanity is equal. It isn't. We can all be equal in value, but we are not equal in abilities, we're not equal in capacities, and we're not equal in opportunities. And we might like to think that we are smart enough and capable enough that if we get the right government in place and we get the right programs in place, we can make equality happen. We can't. It is out of the reach of mankind to create equality among unequal human beings. Here's what I mean by equal and unequal. We can all be equal in value, but we are not all equal in capabilities. I have seen in my life firsthand that there are people who are much smarter than me, and they've been able to understand things that I don't grasp. I've also found in life that there are people with better capabilities than I have, and they've been able to accomplish things and achieve things that I've not been able to do. I recognize that there are people in life that I have been around and people that I have witnessed from afar that are far superior to me in their capabilities and capacities. Now, I can do one of two things with that. I can try to strip them of their uniqueness and dumb them down to be like me. Or I can applaud their achievements and focus on what I should be doing. One will create bitterness, and one is actually impossible. The other will create well-being. If I can applaud you for your achievements, if I can applaud you for you using your capabilities, then my heart is free. I don't have to be you to know that I am valuable as a human being. I don't have to have what you have to know that I'm valuable as a human being. And the fact that the landowner here, who represents God, chooses to distribute his property according to the ability of who he's entrusted it to is an important concept. There's a reason why some have more to work with and others have less to work with. We can either be bitter about it, we can be angry and upset about it, we can demand it be different, or we figure out what's the best way to work in this capacity. In no way, shape, form, or fashion are these 3 servants regarded as being unequal in their value as a human being or their value as a soul. What we're talking about is capabilities. The fact that the landowner distributed them in this way says this is the best way to make use of my resources. Now let's talk about these resources for just a little bit that are distributed each according to his ability. When we look at this story, we recognize that it's using money. Money is symbolic of something. So what if we see it this way? God is the landowner, and he's distributing his property among his servants. Well, what does that look like for God to be distributing his property among you and I? Because we believe that God owns everything. We believe that everything ultimately belongs to him, from the breath in our bodies to the dirt we walk on. So what if we saw that God is distributing his property, and we saw that properties was opportunity, or that properties were abilities that we had? What if God has distributed opportunities and abilities to all of us in life in different measures? That there are some of us that have less opportunities than others. Some of us have more opportunities than others. Some of us have less. Some of us have more abilities, capabilities than others. And the issue is not who has what, but the issue is what do we do with a property that belongs to God that he's entrusted to us. Jesus continues the story in verse 16. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them. And he made, I like that, he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. I love this. Went at once. He made. So here's something that we see that's interesting here. Immediately. There's no time lapse. He went at once. This first servant who had 5 measures of wealth given to him, and the servant that had 2 measures of wealth given to him, they immediately went to work. No hesitation, no questions asked, no wondering how long are you going to be gone, when are you going to be coming back. They just immediately said, this is what you've given me, I'm going to put it to work. And they did. And I know it seems insignificant, but the phrase, he made 5 talents more, is important. The man exerted effort. And in exerting effort, he created something that didn't used to exist for him. Effort is powerful. Effort creates something that didn't previously exist. Anything that you work at, anytime you exert effort, you're creating something with your effort. Your energy produces something. And when I'm talking about effort creating things, don't just think about in the physical realm. That, I'm going to create something beautiful with my hands. I'm going to create a work of art. It's going to be beautiful. My effort creates it. Think more than that. Think in terms of spiritual, emotional, relational things. That you and I exert effort in life, in relationships. We create things in those relationships. We create ideas that can be put into practice, that bring something into existence that didn't used to exist. The idea of effort is beautiful. Effort is attractive. If you don't think effort is attractive, think about this. Why do we fill stadiums and watch sport teams compete against one another on the field or on the court? And we applaud their efforts and their achievements. Why? Because we recognize they're doing something that we cannot, and that they have a skill and ability beyond ours. We applaud it, and we should. We recognize that it is a marvelous thing that when someone takes a skill, works hard at it, develops it to a degree that only a handful of people in all the world are able to do. We applaud it, and we should. Another way of looking at it is a musician, a singer can fill a stadium and have a concert that can draw thousands. And we applaud their effort. We think we're applauding their skill, but what we're actually applauding is their effort in honing their skill and bringing it to such a fine art that we're willing to sacrifice time and money to simply be in the presence physically of someone that we can listen to for free on our device. We're applauding and recognizing effort. Let's scale it down even a little bit more in our lives. Effort is attractive in relationships. On a superficial level, effort is a display of interest. We're interested in something, we exert effort toward it. We're interested in something, we want to learn more about it, we want to understand it better, so we exert effort in understanding it, we pursue it a little bit. That's at a minimal degree. At the highest degree, effort is a display of passion. That we will exert effort on whatever we are most passionate about in life. Passion shows itself in effort. This is why effort is such a big deal in relationships. Let's make it real personal. In a marriage without effort displayed is an effort that will dissolve, or is a relationship that will dissolve. The reason why is because effort is a way of saying, you matter to me. Whenever we display effort in our relationship, we're saying, this marriage, this relationship matters so much that I am exerting this kind of effort in resolving the conflict, fixing a problem, helping you, doing what I can to make our home, make our relationships better for you, not just me. Effort is beautiful. That's why when a husband displays effort toward making his wife happy or creating some gesture that brings meaning to her life, she values it. She recognizes it as a treasure, and vice versa. Effort is a demonstration of passion. And if you perhaps have the belief, well, you shouldn't have to work at love, I would disagree with that powerfully. We might like to have a fairy tale view of love in which we say, well, if you really love someone, you're really compatible, you shouldn't have to work at it. Well, that's false. And here's why I say that's false. Sometimes we equate love with ease. And we create or associate love with an emotional feeling. Love is so much deeper than that. In fact, you really don't know love until there is dis-ease. Because anybody can love when it's easy. Anybody can love when it's comfortable. Anybody can love when the endorphins are kicked in and we feel high with each other. I mean high on love, not high on the... There is something about that kind of feeling that makes the relationship easy. Anybody can love like that. Can you still be good to the other person when you're aggravated at them? When there are no endorphins to be found? Can you still be good to them then? Can you be patient when they've gotten on your last nerve? That's love. You say, well, love shouldn't be hard. You don't know love until it's hard. Because love is a choice to do good and create good and bring about good for the highest possible good that can be achieved in that person's life or in your relationship. That's a devotion to love, and it's a choice. Your feelings will change based on what you had for breakfast. Your feelings will change based on how much sleep you had last night. If both of you have a bad night of sleep, what are the odds that you both wake up feeling wonderful about life and toward each other the next morning? I mean, in our home this morning, my loving wife and I both woke up and we both had a bad night of sleep. One of us was snoring to beat the band. But because I am loving and forgiving, I forgave her for it. And like, it's all right, baby. I got you. But if you go on feelings, what do you do then when the feelings are not so pleasant? And they will be. You choose love. And the only way you can choose love is to exert effort. Work at it. And effort is attractive because you're displaying meaning. You're displaying value in whatever you exhibit effort toward. And this is why, this is a side note here, this is why sometimes your spouse can get aggravated at you if you exert effort toward other things more than him or her. Because they feel that by comparison, their value is being lessened as opposed to whatever else it is you're exerting effort toward. Now, in this story that Jesus is telling, there is a display of effort by these two. That at once, they go to work. And they made, with their effort, something that didn't used to exist. They brought things into being because of their effort. Which tells me something about their view of their master. Tells me something about their view of themselves. And it tells me something about their respect of the landowner. Now, we've covered the first two. But what about that third guy who gets 1 talent, 1 measure? Verse 18, but he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. He's exerted effort, right? But he's exerted effort in avoiding something. The idea that he goes and digs a hole in the backyard and puts his master's money in it, he's exerted effort, but the kind of effort he's exerted is one of avoiding what he needs to do. There are times in our lives in which we know the right thing to do. We know what we should do. We know what is required of us. We know what even God wants us to or what others expect of us and that this would be the right thing to do. But we may often exert more effort into avoiding those things. And we will exert effort into hiding from responsibility. And sometimes, to even put it in a career terminology, sometimes we will work harder at avoiding the work we need to do. And we do this in relationships also. We'll work hard at being busy and being distracted so we don't deal with what needs to be dealt with. That's hiding. That's digging a hole and burying what needs to be dealt with. It's easy for us in life to exert effort in the negative. It gives us an out. It gives us an ability to say, I've taken care of it. But what we've actually done is create further problems. We'll see how this works out in just a moment. Verse 19, now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with him. So the landowner returns, and it's a long time. I want to tell you how this kind of got me this week. I'm very familiar with this story that Jesus told. It's one of my personal favorites. I've learned a lot from it. And I recognize that it's in the context of judgment. And I have always seen this as Jesus is saying that it's a long time, that there is a time gap between the life we live and the time and ages that we live in, and then the time when he returns. So it's a long time before the master returns. So I kind of just skipped over that quickly, and then it kind of hit me differently that no, there's something else to this. So notice the first two servants immediately went to work, and they immediately doubled the amount of treasure that they had. They made double what they had, but it wasn't theirs. So they immediately make their master more money, but they don't get immediate reward for it. So then it kind of clicked with me that sometimes there is a long span of time between you and I doing what we're supposed to do, doing what is right to do, doing what is good to do, and actually receiving a benefit from it. In fact, there are times where we may sacrifice our self-interest, we may sacrifice our comfort to do something that we know is the right thing to do, the good thing to do, and we don't immediately see a gain from it. In fact, if anything, all we feel is like, well, I lost on this one. I exerted effort and I got no reward for it. It is highly possible that it is going to be a long time between you and I choosing to do good and seeing the actual benefits of it. Parents, think of it this way. The things that you teach your children when they're very young and growing up, the lessons you're instilling in them, you don't often see the return on your labor. But as they grow older and you see them make wise decisions and you see how it begins to bear fruit in your life, then you're able to say, that was a good thing. Even so, let's apply it spiritually. That when you and I do what God calls us to do, and it's easy, or not easy, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's hard, and we may not always see a reward or a return on our effort, understand that God still has one coming for us. We do not have to have an immediate action, reaction, choice, and consequence for it to still be the good that we need to do. We don't have to have an immediate payback. Do the good that God calls us to do, that we're capable of doing, and let God sort out the rewards at his time. Here's the accounting in the story of Jesus telling here. Verse 20, and he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. So, when the master spoke to the servant, how did he describe him? Good and faithful. He described his character and his action. That's a neat thing. Good and faithful servant. He spoke to his character and he spoke to his action. You can have good character, but if you don't ever put it into action, is it really good character? You can have good intentions, but if you don't ever put it into action, are they really good intentions? Are they worth anything? Here, good character became good action. And the master refers to him as a good and faithful servant, and he gets a promotion. I'd set you over little, now I will set you over much. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? Because in the story, this man who had the 5 talents was set over much. He had more than any of the other 3. But yet in the landowner's perspective, it was little. But now he's getting much. And here's the thing about talents, capabilities, opportunities. You and I won't have the same as the people around us. And we can either focus on what someone else has and on what someone else is doing, or we can either be busy like this man and saying, this is what's been entrusted to me, I'm going to put it to work. He does, and eventually he gets a promotion. Well, here's the ultimate promotion. The last line of that is, enter into the joy of your master. This is a neat phrasing. He didn't say, here's more joy. Be happy about it. No, enter into the joy of your master. What I see happening here is that the servant became elevated from having his own joy to having the joy of the master. In other words, the servant became family. Enter into my joy. Be part of my life. He was moved from being a servant to being a son. You can have my joy. What I have is now yours. Enter into it. How did the second servant respond? Verse 22. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. The exact same response. Even though they had different amounts, they get the exact same response from the master. This is beautiful. Same thing that was said to the one who had 5 is the same thing that is said to the one who had 2. This is an important concept to get. The master is referring to being a good and faithful servant. He wasn't referring to their good and faithful abilities to multiply wealth. He's referring to their character, their attitude, their faithfulness. Very important distinguishing mark. Now what about that one fellow that goes and digs a hole? Verse 24. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. Now, this is awful. A lot of reasons why it's awful. One thing that's awful is he's actually accusing his master that he is a hard man. So he's referring to his master's character there. He's also saying, reaping where you did not sow. That means he takes something that isn't his. If you're reaping what you don't sow, then it doesn't really belong to you. And gathering where you scattered no seed. He's essentially saying his master is a difficult man. He's unfair, and he's unjust. So it's kind of out of spite that this man says, I was afraid and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. There's a lot to this. I highlighted the phrase, I was afraid, because this is the excuse he's using. But notice that the reason why he's afraid is actually a blame issue. He's blaming the landowner. He's afraid because the landowner isn't fair. He's afraid because the landowner can't be trusted. He's afraid. You know, there's a crazy thing about emotions. Emotions, if we use emotions to hide behind, sometimes we can get away with ducking responsibility. I was afraid, as if having an emotional front should instead elicit comfort and sympathy rather than saying, it doesn't matter what you are afraid of, this is what you should have done. Sometimes in our human relationships, we will use emotions to get a response we want from someone else. Manipulation. And if it's not manipulation, sometimes we will use emotions to hide behind a lack of responsibility we've taken. This is what we should have done, but we didn't do it, so I'm going to hide behind emotion to shield myself. I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. You know, there's another way of looking at this. What was he really afraid of? Was he afraid of responsibility? Was he afraid of doing what he should do? Was he afraid of failure? Was he a person that felt like no matter what I do, I'm not going to get it right, so I'm not even going to try? Or was he just simply afraid of hard work? Was he lazy? Was he afraid of getting out of his comfort zone? Was he afraid of doing something hard? So instead of actually doing something difficult, something that he should have done, he instead closed his shell, drew in, and came up with a reason for why he should let life pass him by, why he should ignore responsibility. How many times in life have we known the right thing to do and we failed to do it because we were afraid of failing, or it was going to be difficult and we didn't know if we could do it, or we just simply didn't want to. We wanted to stay comfortable instead. How many times when we have become fearful when it wasn't actually fear, but rather it was simply lack of interest, to the point that we didn't want to exert the effort. And it sounds better to come up with a reason that justifies our lack of willingness or lack of love. Interesting to me, all three of these men had the same master, but this man did not have the same perspective as the other two. These three men had the same master, but they did not have the same perspective of him. They did not have the same relationship with him. They did not have the same honor toward him, nor did they have the same view of themselves. They not only didn't have the same perspective of the landowner, they didn't have the same perspective of themselves. They didn't have the same perspective of their capabilities, of their responsibilities. These three men were incredibly different. Maybe the landowner saw that, and it was why he distributed the talents the way he did. I don't know. But it's obvious that this man did not see the master the way the other two did. So how would the master respond? Verse 26. Excuse me. But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant." Remember, the first two were called good and faithful. This one is called wicked and slothful. "You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed." He asked the question. He said, "You knew this about me? Well, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." In other words, if you knew I was that kind of person, then why didn't you at least do the minimum of letting someone else manage it? Instead, you hid it where no one could use it. What a twist. The bare minimum would have been letting someone else use it who could have. But instead, you did a negative. You buried it where no one could have access to it, where it could do no good. Oh, what a twist. Sometimes failure to take responsibility is not just a failure to not do a good, it's actually creating a negative. It's actually going deeper into a deficit of wickedness. Because what an unusual thing that the first two were called good and faithful, but the second one is called wicked and slothful, meaning that the reason why the man accused his landowner, the reason why the man refused to take responsibility was a character issue. He was wicked. The fault was not with the landowner. The fault was with the character of the servant. And that character of wickedness was connected to his sloth, his laziness. The landowner is actually saying, you deprived. You didn't just sit. It wasn't just neutral. You created a minus. You deprived me, my kingdom, of what could have been. Quite a scary thought. So here's what the landowner does, verse 28. "So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." Jesus teaches a principle here. that you have some, you're using it, you're growing with it, well, you're going to get more. Jesus is saying that when you move into the plus territory, you're working with what you have, you're being diligent, and you are making good come into being, you're going to have more. More creates more. And it makes sense when we think about it. Growing things grow. Growing things branch out. Growing things produce more fruit. Growth creates more growth. Why wouldn't a healthy thing grow, develop, expand, and multiply? It's not so much what we don't have in life that determines our future. It's what do we do with what we do have? It's easy for us to look at what we don't have and wish we had this and that. And what are we doing with what we do have? And this is the simple principle that Jesus is saying here. You don't have the same as someone else. Your life is not the same as other people, and it won't ever be the same as them. And you can expend all of your energies to try to make their life come down to yours, or you can try to expend all of your energy trying to compare and mitigate what's the difference between the two, or you can simply say, this is what I have in life, I will make the most of it, and then you will find that the most becomes more. Nothing good is created out of envy, out of jealousy, which always happens when we compare our lives to someone else. You're either going to compare yourselves favorably to someone in a difficult situation, or you'll compare yourself disfavorably to a life in which you think you should have what they have. You should be doing what they have. You should enjoy this and experience this. And how unfair life is here with you. Or you can say, this is my life. This is what I have. What can I create good with it? Suddenly, this life becomes a rich and meaningful life. You want to be rich? You want to have power in your life? Take what you've got and make it the best it can be. There are a lot of things in your life that is outside of your control. God is not asking you to work with things that are outside of your control. He's asking you to work with what is in your control. The question is not, what could you do if you had this? The question is, what are you doing with what you do have? How this story ends is dramatic. Verse 38, and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Briefly, I want to give a doctrinal point here. There are two different ways that Bible interpreters try to interpret and understand this meaning. One way is to say that Jesus is speaking here and that this man is an unbeliever. And so outer darkness represents hell, and he's cast away where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There is another school of thought that says, no, he's speaking to a servant. So this is a believer. And this believer has not done anything with what God has given him. The outer darkness is not cast into hell, but in a place of loss. That even in eternity, there is a sense of weeping and gnashing of teeth, of recognizing, I did not do what I could have. And that this is a season of regret in eternity for a believer. So those are the two doctrinal schools of thought. I'm not going to make up your mind for you. I don't think I can. I just want to give you those two. You think about it. You figure it out. You sort it out. But the heart of it is the same. You can either have a place of regret, or you can have a place of joy with your master. And the future you pick is shown in what you give yourself to today. What effort do you exert today? Where are you wanting to build pluses into tomorrow because of what you do today? You want a life filled with a plus side? Then do things today that create it. Let's take a real quick checkup here. First thing that we have to get, here's some great truths that we get from this story. We are responsible to God for how we handle His resources. We're responsible. Every one of us. We will answer to God for what He has entrusted in our lives in the amount of time that we have. Whether our lifespan is little or long, we are accountable to Him for what we do with His. We may say that it's our life. We may say this is our treasure. We've done this. Everything that you and I put our hands to, everything that we say is ours will either vanish with its use, or it will outlive us and belong to someone else. Everything. It's not a question of what we accumulate. It's a question of what we do with what we have. It's going to go somewhere besides with you, except for the character that you have when using it. The second thing we need to know this is responsibility is an opportunity. Every responsibility that you and I have in life, even the responsibilities that we don't like, even the responsibilities that demand sacrifice from us, all of those responsibilities are opportunities. They're opportunities to benefit someone else. They're opportunities to enrich our lives. They're opportunities to enrich someone else. They're opportunities to enjoy experiences. They're opportunities to share experiences. Every responsibility we have is an opportunity for us to demonstrate what is important to us. Every responsibility we have is a reflection on our character. It is a chance for us to prove ourselves. It is a chance for us to find ourselves. How do we handle the responsibilities we have? God's measure of success is the faithfulness more than the product. When Christ tells the story of the different servant, the big thing was not what amount of money did they end up with, but the heart that they distributed or the heart that they demonstrated and how they handled it. What God is interested in is our character, our faithfulness. A good illustration of this occurs in the New Testament. The church of Corinth. It was a church in conflict. And part of the conflict came from who was going to be the spiritual leader that they were following in that divided church that Paul had planted. Here's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So he's saying that one of your leaders did this and the other leader did this, but it was God who gave the growth. We're not all going to do the same thing. He continues in verse 7, so neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Notice this next phrase in verse 8. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor, his effort. The question is not what is the final product that you produce. The question is what is your heart in the middle of production? Are you faithful? Is your character becoming good? This is what God is looking at. So let's make this very real and practical. Let's give ourselves a short list and a short checkup. We're going to call this a faithfulness checkup. Now, this next graphic, there are 4 things here, and these are 4 very broad umbrella things that basically cover our lives. The kingdom of God is where God rules. So let's talk about it in this way. The kingdom of God in our life is going to reflect worship, prayer, devotion, doing the things God asks us to do in His church, in community. That's kingdom of God life. Survival, this is the thing in your life in which you take care of business. This is what you do to generate income to pay the bills. Think of survival as food, clothing, and shelter. You're responsible for this. You're responsible for taking care of your family. You're responsible for taking care of yourself if you have that ability to do. How are you doing with that? Health. When I say health, I mean all of you. Your spiritual health, your emotional health, as well as your physical health. Sometimes as Christians, we get so focused on spiritual things, we forget that we have a physical body, that also belongs to God. So how we take care of everything about us. And by the way, how you take care of your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health will also affect what you do in these other realms as well. So this is a big deal. And this last one, relationships. This refers not just to our perhaps our marriage, but refers to our friendships. Our relationships with other people that we work with, that we share responsibilities with. So look at these 4 key areas in our lives and ask yourself, in this life right now, would I say I'm in the minus category? Do I know that I should be here, but I find myself here? Or maybe you feel like, well, I'm just kind of stuck there. I'm not really good at it, not really bad at it. I'm just kind of neutral. Or maybe you're able to look at some of these and you can say, yes, at this season in my life, this is a plus for me. I'm doing well in this area of my life and I sense it. So you're in a plus category. So give yourself a little bit of checkup. Where are you at right now? And then let's follow it up with this. Which of these categories, minus, neutral, or plus, would you like to be in the future? 5 days. 5 years. which of these characters would you say, I want more plus in that? And maybe you're going to say all of them. I want to be in an abundance of all the good things in every area of this life. If that's your desire, good for you. You should. I mean, how could you look at any of these and say, no, it's just not important? It's important. Well, here's the thing. If you want to get into the plus category in any of these for tomorrow, if you want to enjoy more of the good in them tomorrow, then the question is, what am I giving to these areas today that is affecting tomorrow? And sometimes in life we look at big things and we say, you know, I'm going to do this big thing for God, or I'm going to do this big thing in my career, or this big thing in my health, spiritual, physical, mental, or I'm going to do this big thing for my husband or my wife or my friend, and I'm going to do these big things and that's going to catapult me into the plus. Probably not. Because most of life is not lived in the big things. Most of life is lived in the small things. Small conversations. Small good deeds. Small acts of respect. Small acts of kindness. Most of our lives are not composed of dramatic, large, life-changing things. Most of our life is composed of routine, day-to-day things that we tend to take for granted. You want to change your future? Change how you handle the little things of today, because the little things of today aren't little at all. Those little moments you have with one another, those little moments where you decide how hard you're going to work at something, those little moments where you decide what to give your attention to for the next 30 minutes or hour, those little things determine your day. And what determines your day can determine your week, and what determines your week could determine your life. It's how we handle the little things that can turn people to us or away from us. It's how we handle the little things that can make our relationships grow richer and deeper, or weaker and more distant. It's the little decisions we make about what we give our focus on that determine whether our minds and our hearts become well or become corrupted. It's the little things that catch our eyes, our hearts, and our minds that determine what we think about in the course of a day, which determines all of our emotions, which determines our choices. Life is not made up of the big things nearly as much as it is made up of the small things. I came across a graphic several weeks ago, and I saved it on my phone. I was like, oh, this is good. And I just kept it there on my phone. In fact, I showed it to Melanie a couple of weeks ago. I thought, look at this. It was such a neat thing. And it's simplistic, but it's neat. And I thought it kind of fit in well here. So let me show you this graphic that I found. I spent the best evenings of my life unaware they were significant. So some of you old-timers in here, can you tell me what building this is? Blockbuster. Yeah. My peeps out there, right? There's a great portion of you that are like, what's a Blockbuster? You're a millennial. You're not old enough to know this. But there was a time when there was a chain of stores in which you could rent movies. In fact, I'm so old that the first time that we started to rent movies in our household, we had to rent the machine to watch the movie on. In fact, I'm so old that the machine didn't run on electricity. It was kerosene powered. You know, that's how old I am. And here's the thing. Some of you know immediately what this represents. You're going to have a family movie night. You're going to go down to the store. You're going to pick out a movie. You're going to get a big tub of popcorn. Maybe you're going to send out for pizza. And you're going to come home and you're all just going to gather in the living room, turn the lights down, and you're going to watch a movie. And it was just a nice family night. And you didn't think that much about it at the time other than that this is going to be a nice night. And then you get older. And you parents that did this with your kids crawling around in the living room floor, crawling up into your lap, you're like, boy, I'd sure like to have some of those greasy popcorn fingerprints on me again. Boy, it would be nice if I could get down and wrestle with the kids like that one more time. At the moment, even if you knew that this was a nice moment, you didn't know how significant it would be. Your life is not built up in those big, shining moments of celebration. They're built in this, the little things. It's your little one crawling up onto your lap to fall asleep. It's your little one coming home after a hard day at school and crying and telling you about it, and you just listen attentively and let them know that it's going to be all right. Or it's your spouse coming in with a weight of worry and anxiety on them, telling you about how bad things were today, and you listen and you help put them back together. That's not insignificant, is it? That's where life is lived. It's lived in the details. You want to get into the plus side of things in the future? Take care of the little things today. Stop looking at what someone else has, what someone else is doing, and start looking at what you have right in front of you and make the most of the moments. Make the moments matter. We're going to end today with a point of Jesus that he made when he taught a different story. But the point is right on target with what he said in the story we shared earlier of the men with the talents. Luke chapter 16, verse 10. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, meaning speaking of physical things and treasures of this world, who will entrust to you the true riches? You want to get rich? You want to have a meaningful life? Handle your responsibilities well today. Pay attention to the small things. Be good in the smallest moments, and you'll find that those small moments aren't so small. Be good, be loving, be wise. Bring God to life in the small interactions we have with each other. And suddenly you'll find the true riches of life. And you'll find yourself living in the plus side of things. If you want to get into the plus side of things, it has to begin with one choice. And that's of saying, God, I want you to be in charge of my life. I'm responsible to you. You're the landowner. You're the master. I want to take what you've given me, and I want to use it to the best of my ability. If you've never made the choice to become a Christian, then that's where it begins. You're asking Christ to come into your life. You're recognizing that He is your Lord. If you're in this room and you're making that decision today, please let us know about it. Either see me after service or members of our prayer team after service, or you can do this. In just a moment, we're going to stand and sing, and you want to make that decision today to follow Christ, please come forward. Our prayer team that's going to be to my left in a moment would love to pray with you. There's a quiet room to this side where they could have a longer conversation if you want. Or maybe you're praying for someone you love or a situation in your life that you need wisdom. Our prayer team wants to pray with you for that as well. If you're watching online and you're making that decision of faith today, we are declaring that Christ is your Lord, please let us know. We want to celebrate with you and pray for you. Let's stand together as we sing and as we pray.